Eliza Moore had learned to make herself small, so small that men forgot she was there. It had kept her alive through a loveless marriage and a brutal divorce. But the day a 7-foot Apache warrior walked into her dress shop, filling the doorway like a storm, every instinct she'd honed for survival screamed at her to run. She didn't, and that choice would either destroy her or remake her entirely. If you want to see how far a woman can go when she stops hiding, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The bell above the door chimed and Eliza Moore didn't look up. She'd trained herself not to. Eyes down, hands busy, presence minimal. That was the safest way to move through the world when you were a woman alone in a town that didn't trust outsiders. She was pinning the hem of a calico dress when the air in the shop changed. Not the temperature exactly, but the weight of it, the kind of shift you feel in your chest before a thunderstorm breaks. When she finally glanced toward the entrance, her hands went still. The man standing in the doorway wasn't just tall. He was a wall of muscle and dark skin that seemed to absorb the afternoon light streaming through the windows. His black hair hung past his shoulders, tied back with a strip of leather. He wore a mix of Apache and frontier clothing, buckskin pants, a worn cotton shirt that strained across his chest and shoulders, boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard ground. But it was his face that locked her in place. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from stone, and eyes so dark they looked black until the light caught them and revealed flecks of amber. He wasn't handsome in any soft way. He was the kind of beautiful that came with danger attached. "You make clothes," he said. His voice was low, quiet, and carried the faint accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language. Eliza realized she was staring. Heat crept up her neck. "Yes, I do. I need shirts and pants that fit." He gestured at himself without embarrassment. "Most stores don't carry my size." She believed it. The man was built like he'd been designed to break things. His shoulders were so broad she doubted he could walk through a standard door without turning sideways. Even standing still, he radiated a kind of coiled strength that made her want to step back. Instead, she forced herself to nod. "I can do custom work, but I'll need measurements." "Now?" "If you have time." He considered her for a moment, then stepped fully into the shop and closed the door behind him. The space immediately felt smaller. Eliza wiped her palms on her apron and retrieved her measuring tape from the work table. Her heart was beating too fast. She told herself it was just surprise, just the shock of someone so imposing appearing in her quiet little shop on a Tuesday afternoon. She told herself it had nothing to do with the way he moved, smooth and deliberate, like a predator that never wasted energy. "I'm Eliza Moore," she said, because silence felt worse than talking. "I opened this shop 3 months ago. Kael." He didn't offer a last name. "I live north of town. Hunt mostly. Trade sometimes." "You're Apache." It wasn't a question. "Chiricahua." His expression didn't change. "Is that a problem?" "No." The word came out too quickly, and she wondered if he could hear the lie underneath. It wasn't a problem for her, not really, but it would be for half the people in this town. The kind of people who saw his face and decided what he was before he opened his mouth. She'd spent enough years being judged for things she couldn't control. She wasn't about to do the same to someone else. "Arms out," she said, lifting the measuring tape. He complied without hesitation, extending his arms to the sides. Eliza stepped closer, and that's when his size truly hit her. Standing this near, she had to tilt her head back to see his face. The top of her head barely reached the middle of his chest. She'd always been small, barely 5 feet tall, thin in a way that came from years of not eating enough, and a body that had never been built for softness. Next to him, she felt like a sparrow standing beside a hawk. Her hands shook slightly as she wrapped the tape around his chest. She had to rise onto her toes to get it positioned correctly, and even then she struggled. "I can hold it," Kael said quietly. "I've got it." The words came out sharper than she intended. She didn't, though. The tape slipped, and she had to start over. The second attempt wasn't much better. By the third try, frustration was burning in her throat. "Here." Kael reached up and held one end of the tape against his sternum, steady as stone. "Now measure." Eliza swallowed her pride and took the reading. 52 inches. She'd never made a shirt for a chest that size. She moved to his shoulders next, then his arms. Each measurement reinforced the absurd difference between them. His bicep was nearly as thick as her thigh. His forearm was wider than her calf. "You're quiet," he said. She glanced up, startled. "I'm working." "You were humming earlier, before I came in." Had she been? Eliza didn't remember. "I hum when I sew. Habit. It's nice. You should keep doing it." The comment threw her. It was such a small thing to notice, let alone mention. She focused on the tape measure instead of his face and moved on to his waist. 34 inches. Narrow for a man his size, which made sense given how much of his bulk was in his upper body. She jotted the number in her notebook, aware that he was watching her. "How long have you been sewing?" Kyle asked. "Since I was a girl. My mother taught me." Eliza stepped back and gestured for him to turn around so she could measure his back. It was one of the few things she thought worth passing on. "She didn't think much of you." It wasn't a question, and the bluntness of it startled a laugh out of her. "No, she didn't." "Why not?" "I was too small, too quiet, too useless." She said it like she was reciting a list she'd memorized. Her words, not mine. Cale turned to face her again, and his expression was unreadable. "You don't seem useless to me. You've known me for 10 minutes. Long enough to see you run your own business. That takes more than most people have." Eliza didn't know what to do with that. Compliments always felt like traps, sweet on the surface, barbed underneath. She changed the subject instead. "I'll need a deposit, half up front, half when the work is done." "How much?" She did the math in her head, factoring in fabric costs and labor. $12 for 3 shirts and 2 pairs of pants. "Fair." Cale reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out 6 silver dollars and placed them on the counter. "How long?" 2 weeks. Maybe less if I don't get other orders." "I'll come back in 2 weeks then." He moved toward the door, and Eliza felt something close to relief. The shop would feel normal again once he left. Spacious, breathable. But at the threshold, Kyle paused and looked back at her. "Thank you, Eliza." The way he said her name, slow, deliberate, like he was tasting it, did something strange to her pulse. "You're welcome," she managed. Then he was gone, and the bell chimed again, and the shop was exactly as empty as it had been before. Except it didn't feel empty. It felt like he'd left something behind, some invisible residue of his presence that clung to the air and wouldn't dissipate. Eliza sat down at her work table and stared at the measurements she'd written. 52, 22, 34. Numbers that described a man who shouldn't exist outside of myth. She thought about the way he'd stood so still while she worked, never flinching, never making her feel rushed. She thought about his voice, quiet and careful, like he was used to people being afraid of him and had learned to compensate. She thought about his eyes, dark and steady and far too perceptive for comfort. Then she shook her head, picked up her scissors, and got back to work. 2 weeks later, Kyle returned. Eliza had the clothes ready, folded neatly and wrapped in brown paper. She'd spent more time on them than she probably should have, double-checking seams and reinforcing stitches. The fabric she'd chosen was sturdy, heavy cotton for the shirts, durable wool blend for the pants, built to last. When the bell chimed and he walked in, she realized she'd been waiting for this moment. Not consciously, maybe, but her body had known. Her heart kicked up the second she saw him. "Afternoon," Kyle said. "Afternoon." Eliza gestured to the wrapped bundle on the counter. "Everything's ready. You can try them on in the back if you want to make sure they fit." "I trust you." "You haven't seen them yet." "I trust you," he repeated, and there was something in his tone that made it clear he wasn't just talking about the clothes. Eliza handed over the package and took the remaining $6. Their fingers didn't touch, but it felt like they almost did. "If anything doesn't fit, bring it back. I'll adjust it for free." "They'll fit." Cale tucked the bundle under one arm. Then, instead of leaving, he leaned against the counter and looked at her. "You eat lunch yet?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Lunch. Have you eaten?" No, not yet." "Neither have I. There's a place 2 streets over that makes decent stew. You want to come?" Eliza's first instinct was to say no. She didn't eat lunch with customers. She didn't eat lunch with anyone, really. She kept to herself, stayed small, stayed safe. But something about the way he asked, casual, like it didn't matter much either way, made her pause. Why? She heard herself say. Cale tilted his head slightly. Why what? Why are you asking me to lunch? Because I'd like to talk to you, and people usually eat while they talk. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. If you don't want to, that's fine, but I'm going either way, and I think you'd be better company than eating alone. It wasn't flattery. It was just a statement, delivered in that same calm, even tone he used for everything. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to figure out what he wanted. Men didn't just invite women to lunch without wanting something. That had been drilled into her over years of bad experiences. But Kael's expression was open, patient. He wasn't pushing, he was just asking. All right, she said before she could talk herself out of it. Give me a minute to lock up. Bob. The stew place was small and shabby, tucked between a blacksmith shop and a general store. The owner, a grizzled man named Pete, gave Kael a nod and Eliza a long, curious look as they walked in. 2 bowls, Kael said, and bread if you've got it. Got cornbread, fresh this morning. That'll work. They sat at a corner table, away from the few other patrons. Eliza folded her hands in her lap and tried not to feel self-conscious about the way people were staring. It wasn't subtle. A tiny white woman and a massive Apache man eating lunch together. It was the kind of thing that would be talked about before they even finished their meal. Kael didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. How long have you been in this town? He asked once their food arrived. 3 months. I said that when we met. You did. But you didn't say why you came here. Eliza broke off a piece of cornbread and focused on that instead of his face. I needed a fresh start. This seemed like a good place for it. Fresh start from what? A marriage that didn't work out. He hit you? The question was so direct it made her flinch. No, he just didn't see me. I could have been a piece of furniture for all he cared. She paused, surprised at herself for saying that much. Why do you care? I'm curious about you. Why? Because you're interesting. Eliza let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I'm the least interesting person I know. That's not true. You've known me for 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, I've watched you build something from nothing. You came to a place where you don't know anyone, opened a business, and made it work. That's not nothing, Eliza. She didn't know what to say to that. Compliments still felt foreign, like a language she'd never fully learned. Kael ate his stew in silence for a while, giving her space. Then he said, You're afraid of me. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. I'm not, Eliza said automatically. You are. A little. He set down his spoon and met her eyes. I don't blame you. Most people are. It's not fear. It's just... She struggled to find the right words. You're very large, and I'm very small, and I've spent a lot of my life around men who use size to make a point. I'm not them. I know that. Logically, I know that. She rubbed at her temple, frustrated with herself. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. Kael nodded slowly. What would make you feel safer? The question surprised her. I don't know. No one's ever asked me that before. I'm asking now. Eliza thought about it. I guess... time. Just time to get used to you. Then I'll give you time. He picked up his spoon again and went back to his stew like the conversation was settled. And somehow, that simple acceptance, no argument, no defensiveness, just quiet respect, made her relax in a way she hadn't expected. They finished their meal, and Kael paid for both of them before she could protest. As they walked back toward her shop, he kept a careful distance, never crowding her, never walking too close. Thank you for lunch, Eliza said when they reached her door. You're welcome. Can I come back sometime? For more clothes? For lunch? Or just to talk? Whichever you prefer. She should have said no. She should have drawn a line and kept her life simple and uncomplicated. Instead, she said, All right, you can come back. Kael smiled, barely, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, and it changed his entire face. Made him look younger, less severe. Good, he said. Then he tipped his head in a small nod and walked away. Eliza stood in the doorway and watched him go, her heart doing things it hadn't done in years. This was a mistake, she thought, but she didn't take it back. Over the next month, Kyle became a regular presence in her life. He came by the shop once a week, sometimes with an excuse, a torn seam that needed mending, a request for a new jacket, and sometimes without. They'd talk while she worked, conversations that meandered from the mundane to the personal without ever feeling forced. She learned that he'd been raised by his mother after his father died in a skirmish with settlers, that he'd left his people years ago, not out of anger, but out of a need for solitude that his tribe couldn't accommodate, that he lived alone in the hills, in a cabin he'd built himself, and that he preferred the company of silence to the noise of people. "Don't you get lonely?" Eliza asked one afternoon. They were sitting in her shop, her at the sewing table and him in the chair by the window. He'd brought her a rabbit he'd caught that morning, already skinned and cleaned, and she'd accepted it without questioning why. "Sometimes," Kyle admitted, "but loneliness is better than being around people who make you feel alone." Eliza understood that. She'd felt alone in her marriage every single day. "What about you?" he asked. "You ever get lonely?" "All the time. But you don't talk to people much." "Talking doesn't always help. Sometimes it just reminds you how different you are." Kale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're not that different. I'm small, quiet, and forgettable. That's pretty different from most people." "You're not forgettable." The certainty in his voice made her look up from her stitching. He was watching her with that steady, unblinking gaze that always made her feel like he could see straight through her skin. "How would you know?" she asked. "Because I've tried. I can't stop thinking about you." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded. Eliza's hands stilled. Her pulse was suddenly loud in her ears. "Kyle, I'm not asking you for anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know. You're not forgettable. Not to me." She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to deflect, to make a joke or change the subject. But another part, a part she'd buried for so long she'd almost forgotten it existed, wanted to lean into this, to let herself feel wanted, even if it scared her. "I think about you too," she said quietly. Kyle's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of something warm and dangerous. "Yeah? Yeah." He stood up slowly, and Eliza's breath caught. He crossed the room until he was standing in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head all the way back to see his face. "Can I touch you?" he asked. The question was so gentle it almost broke her. "Where?" "Your hand." She held it out, and he took it in both of his. His hands were enormous, calloused and scarred from years of hard living, but his grip was careful. He turned her hand over, studying it like it was something precious. "You have ink on your fingers," he said. "I was writing an order earlier." "And a cut here." He brushed his thumb over a thin red line on her palm. "Scissors slipped yesterday. You should be more careful." "I'm fine." "I know. But I still want you to be careful." He looked up at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her chest tighten. "I don't want you to get hurt. I've been hurt before. I survived. I know you did, but you shouldn't have to survive me." Eliza's throat went tight. "You're not going to hurt me." "How do you know?" "Because you asked before touching my hand. Because you gave me time when I said I needed it. Because you see me, Kale. Actually see me. And men who hurt people don't do that." He was quiet for a long time. Then he brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, so light she almost didn't feel it. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For trusting me. Even a little." He let go of her hand and stepped back, and Eliza immediately missed the warmth of his touch. "I should go," Kyle said. "I've taken up enough of your afternoon." "You don't have to leave." "I know. But if I stay, I'm going to want to touch you again. And I don't think either of us is ready for that yet." He was right, and she hated it. "Next week?" she asked. "Next week," he confirmed. Then he left, and Eliza sat at her sewing table with her hand still tingling from where he'd kissed it, wondering what the hell she was getting herself into. The shift happened slowly, then all at once. By the second month, Kyle wasn't just visiting her shop. He was walking her home after she closed, bringing her firewood when the nights got cold, sitting with her in the evenings while she sewed and he carved small figures from scraps of wood. People talked, of course. The town wasn't big enough to ignore a white woman spending time with an Apache man. Eliza heard the whispers, saw the looks. A few customers stopped coming to her shop altogether. She didn't care as much as she thought she would, because for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. Kale made her feel seen in a way that was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, but the fear never fully went away. One evening, as they sat together in her small parlor, the fire crackling in the hearth, Eliza finally said what had been building inside her for weeks. "I don't know how to do this." Kyle looked up from the piece of wood he was carving. "Do what?" "This. Whatever this is between us." She gestured vaguely between them. "I don't know how to be close to someone. I spent so long learning how to disappear that I don't know how to let myself be found. You're not disappearing now. That's the problem. When I'm with you, I feel too visible. Like you can see every broken part of me, and it's only a matter of time before you decide I'm not worth the effort." Kyle set down his carving and turned to face her fully. "Do you want to know what I see when I look at you?" "I'm not sure." "I see someone who rebuilt her life from nothing, who survived things that would have broken most people, who's stronger than she gives herself credit for." He paused. "I also see someone who's been taught to make herself small, and I want to spend every day proving to her that she doesn't have to do that anymore." Eliza's eyes stung. "What if I can't unlearn it? What if I'm always going to be like this, small and scared, and then I'll wait, as long as it takes." "Why?" "Because you're worth waiting for." The simplicity of it nearly undid her. No grand declarations, no dramatic promises, just quiet certainty. "I'm afraid of you," she whispered. "I know. Not because I think you'll hurt me, but because when I'm with you, I feel so small, like I could disappear into you and no one would ever find me again." Kale stood up and crossed the room, kneeling in front of her chair so they were almost eye level. "Look at me, Eliza." She did. "You're not going to disappear. I won't let you. And if you ever feel like you're getting lost, you tell me, because I don't want you to shrink for me. I want you to grow." "I don't know how." "Then we'll figure it out together." He reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his palm warm against her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. Eliza's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Yes." Kyle leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When his lips met hers, it wasn't desperate or demanding. It was careful, reverent, like he was handling something fragile that he didn't want to break. And maybe she was fragile. Maybe she'd always been fragile. But in that moment, with his hand cradling her face and his mouth moving gently against hers, Eliza didn't feel like she was disappearing. She felt like she was finally, impossibly, being found. When Eliza woke the next morning, the first thing she did was touch her lips. They were still tender, still humming with the memory of Kyle's mouth on hers. She'd kissed him. Or he'd kissed her. The distinction didn't matter much. What mattered was that it had happened, and now everything felt different. She got dressed slowly, her hands clumsy with the buttons on her dress. The face staring back at her from the small mirror above her wash basin looked the same as always. Pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, hair that never quite stayed where she pinned it. But something in her expression had shifted. There was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. The shop opened at 8, same as always. Eliza unlocked the door, flipped the sign, and settled into her routine. She had 3 orders to finish this week, 2 dresses and a men's coat. Simple work that should have kept her focused. Instead, she kept thinking about the way Kyle had knelt in front of her, making himself smaller so they could be eye level. The way his voice had gone soft when he'd asked permission to kiss her. The way he'd pulled back after, his forehead resting against hers, his breath warm on her skin. "You all right?" he'd asked. "I don't know yet." That's honest. He'd smiled at that just slightly. "You want me to leave?" She'd surprised herself by saying no. They'd sat together for another hour, not talking much, just existing in the same space. When he finally did leave, he'd kissed her forehead and told her he'd see her tomorrow. Tomorrow was today. And Eliza had no idea what she was supposed to do with that. The bell above the door chimed just after noon. She looked up, expecting a customer, and found Kyle instead. He was carrying a basket covered with a cloth. "Brought lunch." "You don't have to keep feeding me." "I know, I want to." He set the basket on the counter and pulled back the cloth, revealing bread, cheese, dried meat, and 2 apples. I figured you probably forgot to eat again. He wasn't wrong. Eliza had gotten so absorbed in hemming the coat that she'd skipped breakfast entirely. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. Kael broke off a piece of bread and handed it to her. How are you feeling? About what? About last night. Eliza took a bite of bread to buy herself time. I'm not sure yet. I keep waiting for it to feel wrong, but it doesn't. Is that bad? I don't know, maybe. She set the bread down and looked at him. I've spent most of my life avoiding this kind of thing, getting close to people, letting them in, and now here you are, and I can't seem to make myself push you away. Do you want to push me away? Sometimes. When I get scared. What scares you? Eliza hesitated. The truth felt too raw, too revealing, but Kael had been nothing but honest with her, and she owed him the same. You do, she admitted. Not in the way you think. It's not about you being big or strong or different. It's about what happens when I'm with you. What happens? I forget to be careful. I forget to make myself small. And that terrifies me, because the last time I stopped being careful, I ended up married to a man who treated me like I didn't exist. She wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know how to be open without getting hurt. Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I can't promise you won't get hurt. People hurt each other all the time, even when they don't mean to. But I can promise I'll never make you feel like you don't exist. And if I do something that makes you feel small, you tell me. Right then. Don't wait, don't let it build up. Just tell me. What if I tell you and you get angry? I won't. Everyone gets angry. Not at you for speaking up. I'd rather you tell me 100 things I'm doing wrong than sit there and suffer in silence. It sounded too good to be true. Men didn't actually want to be told when they screwed up. They wanted compliance, not honesty. That had been Eliza's experience anyway. But Kael's expression was open, earnest. He meant what he was saying. All right, she said. I'll try. That's all I'm asking. They ate together in comfortable silence, and when Kael left an hour later, Eliza felt steadier than she had that morning. Still uncertain, still afraid, but less alone in it. Over the next 2 weeks, Kael kept showing up, sometimes with food, sometimes with firewood, sometimes with nothing but himself. He never stayed longer than she seemed comfortable with, never pushed for more than she was ready to give. And slowly, incrementally, Eliza found herself relaxing around him. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he was terrible at sewing but had tried to mend his own shirt once and ended up with something that looked like a child's craft project, that he could identify animal tracks at a glance and knew which plants were safe to eat and which would kill you. You ever think about going back to your people? She asked one evening. They were sitting outside her shop, watching the sunset. Kael had brought a chair out for himself since the bench was too small for both of them. Sometimes, he said, but I left for a reason. Going back would mean pretending that reason doesn't exist anymore. What was the reason? I didn't fit. I was too big, too quiet, too different. The other men didn't trust me, thought I was holding back, keeping secrets. He shrugged. They weren't wrong. I was holding back because every time I let myself feel something, it came out too strong. Anger, grief, whatever. I couldn't control it the way they wanted me to. Eliza understood that more than he probably knew. So you left. So I left. Figured it was easier to be alone than to keep disappointing people. Do you still feel that way? Most days, yeah. He glanced at her. But not when I'm with you. The admission settled between them, warm and heavy. I don't want to disappoint you either, Eliza said quietly. You won't. You don't know that. I know you're trying. That's enough. It shouldn't have been enough. Trying wasn't the same as succeeding. But the way Kael said it made it sound like trying was the only thing that mattered. That night, after he left, Eliza lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what was happening. She'd kissed a man who barely fit through doorways, a man the town whispered about, a man who should have scared her but didn't. And the strangest part was that she didn't regret it. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon that started normal and ended in chaos. Eliza was in the shop, working on a wedding dress for a customer, when the door slammed open. She looked up, startled, and found 3 men standing in the entrance. She recognized 2 of them, ranch hands who worked for one of the larger spreads outside town. The third was unfamiliar, older, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that lingered too long. "Help you, gentlemen?" Eliza kept her voice steady, even as her pulse kicked up. "Heard you've been spending time with that Apache," the older man said. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Eliza set down her needle carefully. "I don't see how that's your business." "It's everyone's business when a white woman disrespects herself like that." The words hit like a slap, but Eliza had heard worse. She'd been hearing worse her whole life. "I think you should leave. We're just trying to look out for you, ma'am." One of the ranch hands stepped forward, his expression almost apologetic. "That man's dangerous. You don't know what you're getting into." "I know exactly what I'm getting into, and I'm asking you to leave my shop." The older man sneered. "You think he cares about you? Men like that don't care about anything except what they can take. He's using you. Get out." "Or what? You gonna run to your savage boyfriend and have him handle it?" The man laughed, harsh and ugly. "You're stupider than you look." Eliza's hands were shaking. She hated that they could see it, hated that her body betrayed her fear. "Get out of my shop, now!" The older man took a step closer, and Eliza's breath caught. She was alone, unarmed, and too small to fight off 3 grown men if they decided to do something. The door opened behind them, and Kael filled the frame. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there taking in the scene, Eliza backed against her work table, the 3 men crowding her space. His expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "There a problem here?" Kael's voice was quiet, almost conversational. The older man turned, and his sneer faltered when he saw who he was facing. "This doesn't concern you." "It does if you're in her shop uninvited." "We were just having a conversation." "Didn't sound like a conversation to me." Kael stepped inside, and the men had to move back to make room for him. He positioned himself between them and Eliza without making it obvious. "Sounded like you were harassing her." "We're looking out for her welfare." "By calling her stupid?" Kael's tone didn't rise, but there was steel underneath it now. "That how you look out for people where you come from?" The ranch hands were already edging toward the door. The older man held his ground a moment longer, then spat on the floor. "You're making a mistake, girl. When he's done with you, don't come crying to decent folk." "Leave," Kael said. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a threat. The men left. The door swung shut behind them, and the shop fell silent. Eliza let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her legs felt weak. "You all right?" Kael asked. "Fine." "Eliza." "I'm fine." Her voice cracked on the second word, and she cursed herself for it. Kael crossed the room and crouched in front of her, same as he had that night by the fire. "Talk to me." "There's nothing to say. They're idiots." "They scared you." "Of course they scared me. I'm 5 feet tall, and they're grown men who think they have the right to tell me how to live my life." She pressed her palms against her eyes. "I'm so tired of being scared." "I know." "Do you?" "Because you're not the one people think they can push around. You walk into a room and people move. I walk into a room and people don't even notice I'm there." "I notice." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Eliza dropped her hands and looked at him. "The point is that being with you makes me a target. Those men came here because they've seen us together, because they think I need protecting from you. And I don't know how to make them understand that you're the safest I've felt in years." Kael's jaw tightened. "If being with me puts you in danger, maybe we should—" "Don't!" She cut him off before he could finish. "Don't you dare say we should stop seeing each other. I won't let them win like that. It's not about winning, it's about keeping you safe." "I don't need you to keep me safe. I need you to keep being who you are." She reached out and grabbed his hand, holding it tight. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of making myself small so other people feel comfortable. And I'm tired of letting fear run my life." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't care what they think. I care about you. And if that makes me stupid, then fine. I'm stupid." Kael stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood, pulling her up with him, and wrapped his arms around her. It was the first time he'd held her like this, fully, completely. Her face pressed against his chest, his chin resting on top of her head. She should have felt smothered, trapped. But instead she felt anchored, like she could finally stop bracing herself against the world. "You're not stupid," Kael said quietly. "You're the bravest person I know." Eliza's throat tightened. "I don't feel brave." Brave people usually don't. They stood like that for a long time, and when Kael finally pulled back, there was something different in his eyes, something fierce and determined. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not unless you tell me to." "I won't." "Good." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her mouth, slow and deliberate, like he was making a promise. "Because I'm not done with you yet." Eliza laughed despite herself. "What does that mean?" "It means I want more of this. More of you. And I don't care who knows it. People are going to talk. Let them talk. They already think you're dangerous. I am dangerous. Just not to you." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're the one thing in this world I'd never hurt." It was the kind of thing that should have sounded like a line, too smooth, too practiced, but coming from Kael, it just sounded like the truth. "Stay for dinner," Eliza said. "I'll make something." "You don't have to cook for me." "I know. I want to." His smile was small but genuine. "All right, I'll stay." They closed the shop early and walked back to Eliza's small house at the edge of town. She made stew from the rabbit Kael had brought her last week, and they ate at her tiny kitchen table, their knees bumping underneath. "This is good," Kael said. "It's basic." "Still good." After dinner, they sat by the fire again. Kael had his arm around her shoulders, and Eliza had her head resting against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always." "Why me?" "You could have anyone. Someone taller, prettier, less complicated." Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You remember the first time I came into your shop?" "Of course." "You were humming, some song I didn't recognize, and when I walked in, you looked up, and I saw you trying to decide whether to be afraid of me." He shifted slightly, adjusting his arm so she was more comfortable. "Most people don't bother deciding. They just are. But you looked at me like you were willing to give me a chance, even though everything in you was probably screaming to run. I almost did run. But you didn't. You measured me for clothes, and you were professional, and you didn't treat me like I was less than human. Do you know how rare that is?" Eliza didn't know what to say. "And then you let me come back, and you talked to me like I mattered. And every time I left, I found myself looking for excuses to see you again." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "So yeah, maybe there are women out there who are taller or prettier or less complicated, but none of them are you, and you're the only one I want." Eliza's eyes burned. "I don't know how to be what you need. You already are. I'm broken, Kael. I'm scared all the time, and I don't know how to stop being scared." "Then be scared. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm just asking you to be here." She tilted her head back to look at him. "What if I mess this up?" "Then we'll figure it out together." "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. I care about you. You care about me. Everything else is just noise." Eliza wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that love could be simple, that it didn't have to hurt, but every instinct she'd honed over the years told her to be careful, to protect herself, to expect disappointment. Kael seemed to sense her hesitation. "Talk to me. What's going on in your head?" "I keep waiting for this to fall apart, for you to realize I'm not worth the trouble." "That's not going to happen. You don't know that." "I do, actually, because I've already seen you at your worst and I'm still here." "This isn't my worst." "Then show me your worst. Let me see all of it. I'm not going anywhere." Eliza pulled back slightly so she could see his face. "You say that now, but what happens when you get tired of dealing with my fear? When you realize that I'm always going to need reassurance, always going to doubt myself?" "Then I'll reassure you. Every day if I have to." "That's exhausting. So is hunting every day. So is chopping firewood. So is existing." He cupped her face in his hands. "I don't mind the work, Eliza. Not when it comes to you." She kissed him before she could talk herself out of it. This time it wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate, hungry, like she was trying to convince herself that this was real. Kael kissed her back just as fiercely, his hand sliding into her hair. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I don't know what I'm doing," Eliza admitted. "Neither do I. But we'll figure it out." She laughed, shaky and breathless. You're really not going to give up on me, are you? Not a chance. They stayed up late that night, talking and kissing and learning the shape of each other. When Kyle finally left, well past midnight, Eliza stood in the doorway and watched him disappear into the darkness. She was still scared, still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could do this. The morning after brought a pounding on Eliza's door that yanked her from sleep. She stumbled out of bed, heart racing, and opened it to find Mrs. Hutchins standing on her porch. The older woman ran the boarding house 2 streets over and had never spoken to Eliza before today. You need to come see what they've done, Mrs. Hutchins said without preamble. What who's done? Just come. Eliza threw a shawl over her nightgown and followed Mrs. Hutchins down the street. A small crowd had gathered outside the dress shop, and when Eliza pushed through, her stomach dropped. Someone had painted words across her front window. Savage lover in crude red letters that dripped like blood. I'm sorry, dear, Mrs. Hutchins said quietly. I saw it when I was heading to the market this morning. Eliza stared at the words, her face burning. A few people in the crowd were whispering. Others just looked uncomfortable. No one offered to help clean it. Do you know who did it? Eliza asked. I have my suspicions, but no proof. Mrs. Hutchins touched her arm. You should wash it off before more people see. Eliza nodded numbly. She went back home, got dressed properly, and returned with a bucket of soapy water and rags. The paint was still tacky, which made it easier to remove but also meant it had been done recently. Probably last night, after Kyle left. She scrubbed at the window, her hands shaking with anger and humiliation. The crowd dispersed slowly, but she could feel eyes on her from windows and doorways. The whole town would know by noon. She was still scrubbing when Kyle arrived. He took one look at the smeared red paint and his expression went cold in a way she'd never seen before. Who did this? I don't know. Eliza. His voice was low, dangerous. Who did this? I don't know, and even if I did, what would you do about it? Beat someone up? That would just prove them right. She threw the rag into the bucket, splashing soapy water onto the boardwalk. They want you to react. Don't give them the satisfaction. They vandalized your shop. I know what they did. I'm the one cleaning it up. Cale's jaw worked like he was physically holding back words. Then he grabbed a rag from the bucket and started scrubbing the other half of the window without asking permission. They worked in tense silence. When the paint was finally gone, Eliza's arms ached and her dress was soaked. She dumped the dirty water into the street and carried the bucket inside. Kyle followed. You shouldn't have to deal with this, he said. But I do. That's reality. Eliza set the bucket down harder than necessary. This is what happens when people like me get involved with people like you. People like me. She heard the edge in his voice and winced. That came out wrong. Did it? Kale, I didn't mean... You did mean it. You just didn't mean to say it out loud. He stood there, filling her small shop, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked hurt. You think I don't know what I am? What people see when they look at me? That's not what I said. It's what you meant. And maybe you're right. Maybe being with me is too hard, too dangerous, too much trouble. Don't do that. Don't put words in my mouth. Then what are you saying? Eliza pressed her hands to her face. I'm saying I'm scared. I'm saying I don't know how to do this. I'm saying that every time I start to feel safe, something happens to remind me that the world doesn't want us to be together. So what? We just give up? I didn't say that either. Then what do you want from me, Eliza? You want me to leave you alone? You want me to fix this somehow? You want me to make it easier? His voice rose slightly, frustration bleeding through. Because I can't. I can't change who I am, and I can't change how people see me. All I can do is be here and hope that's enough. It is enough, she said quietly. You are enough, but I don't know if I am. That stopped him. His expression shifted from anger to something softer, more uncertain. What does that mean? It means I'm terrified that one day you're going to wake up and realize that I'm not worth all this. That dealing with my fear and my past and my inability to just be normal is exhausting. She wrapped her arms around herself. You deserve someone stronger than me. I don't want someone stronger. I want you. Why? I can't even stand up to a little paint on a window without falling apart. You're not falling apart. You're angry and scared, and that's normal. Kale crossed the room and took her hands, pulling them away from her body. Stop trying to be perfect. Stop trying to be what you think I need. Just be you. What if who I am isn't good enough? It is. You are. He squeezed her hands. And I need you to believe that because I can't keep reassuring you every time someone does something cruel. Not because I don't want to, but because you have to learn to trust yourself. Eliza looked down at their joined hands. His were so much larger than hers, calloused and scarred from hard living. Hers were small and ink-stained, with a bandage on one thumb from where she'd pricked herself with a needle yesterday. I don't know how to trust myself, she admitted. Then start small. What do you know right now, in this moment? I know I don't want to lose you. Good. What else? I know that I care about you more than I care what other people think. Better. What else? I know that you make me feel seen in a way that scares me and excites me at the same time. Keep going. I know that when you touch me, I don't feel small. I feel like I matter. Her voice cracked. And I know that terrifies me because I've never mattered to anyone before. Kale pulled her against his chest and wrapped his arms around her. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. You matter to me, he said into her hair, more than you know. They stood like that for a long time, and when Eliza finally pulled back, her face was wet. I'm sorry, she said. For what I said earlier, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I know, but you need to figure out what you actually mean, because I can't keep guessing. I mean that I'm not used to this. Being with someone who doesn't make me feel like I have to shrink. And sometimes that's overwhelming, and I say stupid things. Then say stupid things. I can handle stupid things. What I can't handle is you pushing me away because you're scared. I'm always scared. I know. But there's a difference between being scared and letting fear make your decisions for you. Eliza wiped her eyes. You're right. I know you're right. So what are you going to do about it? She thought about that. About the painted window and the whispers and the way people looked at her now. About the life she'd had before Kael, quiet, safe, lonely. About the life she could have with him, complicated, risky, full. I'm going to stop apologizing for wanting you, she said finally. And I'm going to stop letting other people tell me what I should feel. Good. Kale kissed her forehead. That's a start. They spent the rest of the morning together. Kael helped her rearrange some fabric bolts that had gotten disorganized, and Eliza mended a tear in his jacket that he'd been ignoring for weeks. It was domestic and ordinary, and exactly what she needed. By afternoon, she felt steadier. The window was clean, the shop was in order, and Kael was sitting in his usual chair by the window, carving another small figure from a piece of wood. What are you making? Eliza asked. A bird, or it's supposed to be a bird. Might end up looking more like a deformed chicken. She laughed despite herself. Can I see? He held it up. It actually did look more like a chicken than a bird. It's terrible, she said. I know. I'm better with my hands when I'm building things, not carving them. What do you build? Furniture mostly, tables, chairs, shelves, practical stuff. He turned the wooden bird over in his palm. I built my whole cabin myself. Took me 2 years. I'd like to see it sometime. Kale looked up, surprised. Yeah? Yeah, if you want to show me. I do, but it's about an hour's ride from town. You'd have to come on horseback. I can ride. When's the last time you were on a horse? Eliza hesitated. 10 years, maybe? But it's like sewing. You don't forget. That's not remotely the same thing, but all right. Kale grinned. How about this weekend? I'll borrow a horse for you from a friend. You have friends? A few. They don't come into town much, so you wouldn't have met them. What are they like? Quiet. Keep to themselves. Don't ask questions. He shrugged. My kind of people. Eliza felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of meeting Kael's friends, but she pushed it down. All right, this weekend. It's a plan. Saturday came faster than Eliza expected. She closed the shop early and met Kael at the edge of town, where he was waiting with 2 horses. One was his, a massive gray gelding that suited him perfectly. The other was smaller, a sorrel mare with a gentle face. This is Rosie, Kael said, stroking the mare's neck. She belongs to a widow who lives out past my place. Won't give you any trouble. Eliza approached slowly and let Rosie sniff her hand. The horse nickered softly. See? She likes you already. Cale handed Eliza the reins. Need help mounting? I can manage. She couldn't, actually. It had been too long, and she'd forgotten how high up a horse's back was when you were only 5 feet tall. After 2 failed attempts, Cale came up behind her. May I? Eliza nodded, embarrassed. Cale put his hands on her waist and lifted her into the saddle like she weighed nothing. The casual display of strength made her stomach flip. Thanks, she muttered. Any time. He swung onto his own horse with easy grace. Ready? As I'll ever be. They rode out of town at an easy pace. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills dotted with scrub brush, and the occasional stand of trees. The sky was enormous, pale blue and cloudless. Eliza had forgotten how much she liked being outside like this. In the years since her marriage ended, she'd spent most of her time indoors, bent over fabric and thread. It felt good to move, to breathe air that didn't smell like lamp oil and wool. You all right back there? Cale called. Fine, just out of practice. Let me know if you need to rest. They rode for about an hour before the terrain started to change. The hills got steeper, the vegetation thicker. Eliza could hear water running somewhere nearby. Almost there, Cale said. His cabin appeared around a bend, a sturdy log structure nestled against a hillside with a small corral and a vegetable garden out front. It was simple but well built, the kind of place that looked like it could weather any storm. You built all this? Eliza asked as they dismounted. Most of it. The corral I traded for. Cale tied the horses and led her inside. The interior was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a table and chairs nearby. A bed stood in the corner, neatly made. Shelves lined another wall, holding tools and supplies. Everything had a place. It's nice, Eliza said. Quiet. That's the idea. Cale gestured toward the table. Sit. I'll make coffee. While he worked, Eliza explored. There wasn't much to see. Cale clearly didn't keep many personal belongings. But she noticed small details. A basket of kindling by the fireplace. A row of books on one shelf, their spines cracked from use. A blanket folded precisely at the foot of the bed. You're neat, she observed. Habit. When you live alone, you learn to take care of your space. Were you always this organized? No. My mother used to yell at me for leaving my things everywhere. Yum. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups. But after she died, I had to figure it out on my own. Turns out it's easier to keep things clean than to let them get messy. Eliza took the cup he offered. How old were you when she died? 17. She got sick one winter and never recovered. His expression didn't change, but she heard the grief underneath his words. I stayed with my people for a few more years after that, but it wasn't the same. She was the only one who really understood me. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Cale sat across from her. What about your parents? My mother died when I was 20. My father before that, I barely remember him. Eliza wrapped her hands around the warm cup. She wasn't a kind woman, but she was all I had. When she died, I felt more relieved than sad, and that made me feel guilty. You shouldn't feel guilty for that. I know, but I do anyway. She took a sip of coffee. It was strong and bitter, exactly how she liked it. How did you know how I take my coffee? I pay attention. That simple statement undid something in her chest. He paid attention, not just to big things, but to small ones. The way she took her coffee, the way she hummed when she worked, the way she wrapped her arms around herself when she was nervous. What? Cale asked, noticing her expression. Nothing, just thank you for bringing me here. You're welcome. He stood and held out his hand. Come on, I want to show you something. She followed him outside and around the back of the cabin. A narrow trail led up the hillside, and they climbed it together, Cale's hand steadying her when the path got steep. At the top, the view opened up. Miles of wilderness stretched out before them, hills and valleys and distant mountains. The sun was starting to set, painting everything gold and orange. This is why I stay, Cale said. Up here, none of that town nonsense matters. It's just land and sky. Eliza stood beside him, trying to take it all in. It's beautiful. Yeah, it is. But when she glanced over, he was looking at her, not the view. Her breath caught. Kael, I'm in love with you, he said. Not like a confession, just like a fact. I know it's too soon, and I know you're not ready to hear it, but I need to say it anyway. I'm in love with you, Eliza. And I don't care if that scares you, or if it's complicated, or if the whole town thinks I'm making a mistake. It's the truth. Eliza's heart was beating so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. You can't just say things like that. Why not? Because I don't know what to do with them. You don't have to do anything. I'm not asking you to say it back. I just wanted you to know. She turned away, looking out at the view because it was easier than looking at him. What if I can't love you the way you want me to? There's no way I want you to love me. There's just however you're capable of loving. That might not be much. I'll take whatever you can give. Eliza closed her eyes. You're making this very hard. Good. You should have to work for it. I am. That startled a laugh out of her. You're impossible. I've been told. He moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel his warmth. Can I ask you something? What? When you're with me, do you feel like you're disappearing? Like I'm too much and you're getting lost? She thought about it honestly. Sometimes. Not because of anything you do, just because of how different we are. When I stand next to you, I feel the size difference in my bones, and there's a part of me that's still convinced that being small means being insignificant. But you don't really believe that. No, I don't. She turned to face him. When I'm with you, I feel small in terms of size, but not in terms of importance. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. I'm trying, Kael. I'm trying to unlearn all the things I was taught about taking up space and being seen. But it's hard, and I don't always get it right. I know, and I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm just asking you to keep trying. What if I mess this up? What if I hurt you? Then you hurt me, and we deal with it. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm not fragile, Eliza. You're not going to break me. You're not fragile, but your feelings are. Maybe, but I'd rather risk getting hurt than spend my life alone because I was too afraid to try. She looked up at him, this enormous man who somehow made her feel bigger instead of smaller. I don't know how to love someone properly. My marriage taught me all the wrong things. Then we'll figure out the right things together. You keep saying that, like it's easy. It's not easy, but it's simple. We care about each other, so we show up. We make mistakes, so we apologize. We get scared, so we talk about it. That's all love is, really, showing up and trying. Eliza wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love could be that straightforward, that it didn't have to be the complicated, painful thing she'd always known it to be. I'm not ready to say it back, she said quietly. The love thing, I'm not there yet. I know, but I care about you. A lot. More than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. That's enough for now. Is it really? Yes. Because I know you, Eliza. I know you don't say things you don't mean. So when you do say it, if you say it, I'll know it's real. She stood on her toes and kissed him. It was softer than their previous kisses, less desperate. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark. What was that for? He asked. For being patient with me. For not pushing. For making me feel like I matter. She rested her forehead against his chest. For everything. Hale wrapped his arms around her, careful and gentle. They stood like that as the sun finished setting, turning the sky deep purple and then black. Stars began to appear, more than Eliza had ever seen in town. I should get you home, Kael said eventually. It's late. I don't want to go yet. You can come back any time. This place is yours too, if you want it to be. The offer hung between them, weighted with meaning, a place that was hers, a space she could occupy without having to make herself smaller to fit. I'd like that, Eliza said. They rode back to town under the stars, and when Kael walked her to her door, he kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her chest ache. See you tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow, she confirmed. That night, lying in bed, Eliza thought about everything Kael had said, about love and showing up and trying, about the cabin on the hill and the view that stretched for miles, about the way he looked at her like she was something worth seeing. She thought about the word love and how it had always felt like a trap before, something that demanded too much and gave too little. But with Kael, it felt different, less like a cage and more like a door opening. She wasn't ready to walk through that door yet, but for the first time in her life, she thought maybe she could be. The morning started with Kael showing up at her door carrying a basket of eggs and looking sheepish. "My friend's chickens are producing more than she can use," he said, by way of explanation. "Thought you might want some." Eliza took the basket and stepped aside to let him in. "You know you don't need an excuse to visit me, right?" "I know, but I also know you haven't been eating enough, so the eggs seemed practical." "I eat. Bread and cheese don't count as a meal." "They do when you're busy." She set the basket on her kitchen table and turned to face him. "Stay for breakfast. I'll prove I know how to cook." Kael smiled. "All right." She made scrambled eggs with herbs from the small pot on her windowsill, and they ate together at the table. It felt ordinary in the best way, the kind of quiet domestic moment Eliza had never thought she'd want. But with Kael, even the simple things felt significant. "I've been thinking," Kael said, pushing eggs around his plate. "About what?" "About what you said. About feeling small when you're with me." He set down his fork. "I don't want you to feel that way. Ever. I know you don't, and it's getting better, I promise." "Is it? Or are you just getting better at hiding it?" The question caught her off guard. "What makes you think I'm hiding it?" "Because I know you. You've spent your whole life learning how to hide what you feel. I don't want you doing that with me." Eliza stared at her plate. He was right, of course. She had been hiding it, not consciously, but out of habit. The instinct to smooth things over, to not make waves, was so deeply ingrained that she did it without thinking. "You're right," she said finally. "I do hide it sometimes, not because I don't trust you, just because it's easier than admitting I'm still struggling." "Easier for who?" "For both of us. You don't need to hear me complain about the same thing over and over." "That's not complaining. That's being honest." Kyle reached across the table and took her hand. "I meant what I said before. If something's bothering you, I want to know, even if it's the same thing 100 times, especially if it's the same thing." "Why?" "Because that means it's important. And if it's important to you, it's important to me." Eliza looked at their joined hands. "It's hard to explain. The feeling comes and goes. Sometimes I'm with you and I feel completely fine. Strong, even. And then something happens. You reach for something on a high shelf, or someone stares at us on the street, and suddenly I'm reminded of how different we are. And it's not about you, it's about me and all the garbage in my head that tells me I'm not enough." "What would help?" "I don't know. Maybe if I could just stop comparing myself to you. Stop measuring my worth by how I stack up against your size, or your strength, or your confidence. You're stronger than you think. In some ways, but not in others, and I hate that I can't just get over it. I hate that something as stupid as physical size can make me feel so inadequate." Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I show you something?" "What?" "Just trust me." He stood and pulled her to her feet, then positioned her in front of him. "Look at us." There was a small mirror on the wall, and Eliza could see their reflection, her tiny frame dwarfed by his massive one. It was jarring, the difference between them. "I see it," she said. "I see how small I am next to you." "That's not what I want you to see." Kael placed his hands on her shoulders, gentle but firm. "Look at your face." She did. Her expression was tense, guarded. "Now look at mine." His face was calm, open. There was no judgment there, no impatience, just steady affection. "What am I supposed to be seeing?" "That when I look at you, I don't see small. I see fierce. I see someone who survived a bad marriage and built a life on her own. I see someone brave enough to give me a chance, even though everything in her past told her not to." He squeezed her shoulders lightly. "Size doesn't measure worth, Eliza. And the fact that you're physically smaller than me doesn't make you less. It just makes you different. I know that logically. But you don't feel it yet. And that's okay. It'll take time." He turned her to face him. "But I need you to stop punishing yourself for not being there yet. You're trying, and that's what matters." Eliza felt her throat tighten. "What if I never get there? What if I'm always going to struggle with this? Then you struggle with it, and I'll be here while you do. I told you before, I'm not expecting perfection. I'm just expecting honesty. That's a lot to ask for. I know, but I think you can do it. The faith in his voice made her want to cry and laugh at the same time. You're too good to me. No, I'm exactly as good as you deserve. She kissed him then, standing on her toes and pulling him down to her level. He responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her waist and lifting her slightly so she didn't have to strain. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. I'm trying, Eliza said. I really am trying to believe what you're telling me. I know, and I can see it working. You're different than you were 2 months ago. How? You look at me now. When we first met, you barely made eye contact. Now you hold my gaze. He brushed his thumb across her cheek. You take up more space, not physically, but in the way you carry yourself. You're louder, more present. I feel louder. Sometimes it scares me. Why? Because being loud got me in trouble before. My ex-husband hated it when I had opinions. When I spoke up, he said I was being difficult. He was an idiot. Maybe. But his voice is still in my head sometimes, telling me to be quiet, to not make waves, to just accept things as they are. What do you tell that voice? Eliza thought about it. Usually nothing. I just try to ignore it. Maybe you should talk back to it. Tell it to shut up. That feels aggressive. Good. Be aggressive. You've spent enough time being passive. The suggestion was so blunt it startled her. But there was something appealing about it, too. The idea that she could push back against the voice in her head instead of just enduring it. I'll try, she said. That's all I'm asking. They spent the rest of the morning together, and when Kael finally left to run errands, Eliza found herself thinking about what he'd said. About being different, about taking up space, about the voice in her head that told her to stay small. That afternoon, a woman came into the shop. Eliza recognized her vaguely. She lived on the outskirts of town and kept mostly to herself. She was older, maybe 50, with graying hair and a weathered face. I need a dress, the woman said without preamble. Something sturdy, for work, not for show. I can do that. Eliza grabbed her measuring tape. What kind of work? Farm work. I've got a small place north of here. Chickens, vegetables, that sort of thing. They talked measurements and fabric choices, and the woman, her name was Martha, turned out to be refreshingly direct. No small talk, no judgment, just business. When they finished, Martha counted out coins for the deposit. Then she paused. You're the one seeing the Apache man. It wasn't a question. Eliza braced herself for another lecture, another round of thinly veiled insults disguised as concern. I am, she said carefully. Good for you. Eliza blinked. What? I said good for you. Takes guts to go against what everyone expects. Martha pocketed the rest of her coins. Most people in this town are cowards. They talk big, but they're all terrified of stepping outside the lines. You're not. I respect that. I thank you. Don't thank me. I'm just stating a fact. Martha headed toward the door, then paused. That man treats you well? He does. Then don't let the gossips run you off. They'll move on to someone else eventually. They always do. After Martha left, Eliza stood in the quiet shop and felt something shift inside her. One person's approval shouldn't have mattered so much. But it did, because it reminded her that not everyone in this town thought she was making a mistake. That evening, Kael came by again. He'd brought venison this time, already butchered and wrapped. You're going to make me fat, Eliza said, taking the package. You could use a few extra pounds. That's rude. It's true. You're too thin. She wanted to be offended, but he said it with such matter-of-fact concern that she couldn't manage it. Fine. I'll cook the venison, but you're staying for dinner. Wasn't planning on leaving. They fell into an easy rhythm, Eliza cooking while Kael set the table and stoked the fire. It felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. Over dinner, Eliza told him about Martha. She said I had guts, Eliza said. Can you believe that? Me, having guts. I can believe it. You do have guts. I really don't. I'm terrified most of the time. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing things even though you're scared. You sound like a fortune cookie. Kael laughed. Maybe, but it's still true. Do you get scared? Eliza asked. All the time. Of what? Losing you, hurting you, not being enough for you. He set down his fork. Loving someone is terrifying. You're giving them the power to destroy you, and you're just hoping they don't. I would never destroy you. I know, but the fear's still there. Eliza reached across the table and took his hand. I'm scared too, of all the same things. Then I guess we're both idiots? Guess so. They finished eating, and afterward Kael helped her clean up. As he dried dishes, Eliza found herself watching him. The way he moved with such careful precision, like he was always aware of his size and adjusting for it. The way his hands, so large and capable, handled her delicate dishes without breaking them. What? He asked, catching her staring. Nothing, just thinking. About what? About how strange this is. You being here, in my kitchen, drying dishes. A few months ago, I couldn't have imagined this. Strange good or strange bad? Strange good. Definitely good. When the dishes were done, they moved to the small sitting area. Eliza curled up in her chair, and Kael sat on the floor near the fire, his back against the wall. It was where he always sat when he visited. He claimed her furniture was too small for him, which was probably true. Can I ask you something? Eliza said. Always. When you said you loved me, did you mean it? Or was it just something you said in the moment? Kael looked at her steadily. I meant it. I don't say things I don't mean. Not even to make someone feel better. Especially not that. Lying to make someone feel better is still lying. Eliza pulled her knees to her chest. I keep thinking about it, about what you said, and I keep trying to figure out if I feel the same way. You don't have to figure it out on a timeline. But don't you want to know? Eventually, sure. But I'm not in a hurry. Love isn't a race. My marriage moved fast. Too fast. We barely knew each other when we got married, and that was part of the problem. I don't want to make that mistake again. Then don't. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. She studied his face, looking for signs of impatience or frustration. She found none. How are you so patient? She asked. Practice. And I care more about getting it right than getting it fast. What if we never get it right? Then at least we tried. That's more than most people can say. Eliza rested her chin on her knees. I think I might love you. I'm just not sure yet. That's honest. I appreciate that. Doesn't it bother you that I can't just say it? No, because when you do say it, I'll know you're sure, and that's worth waiting for. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Eliza said, Tell me about your mother. Kael's expression shifted, becoming softer. What do you want to know? What was she like? Strong, smart. She had to be, raising a kid alone in a community that didn't always accept us. He stared into the fire. She taught me how to hunt, how to track, how to read the land, but she also taught me how to be gentle, how to control my strength so I didn't hurt things by accident. She sounds amazing. She was. I miss her every day. Do you think she'd approve of me? Kael looked at her surprised. Yeah, I think she'd like you a lot. Really? She always said I needed someone who wouldn't let me hide, someone who'd call me on my bullshit. He smiled slightly. You do that. I do? All the time, you just don't realize it. Eliza thought about that. She'd never considered herself particularly confrontational, but maybe that was the point. She didn't have to be loud to challenge him. She just had to be honest. I wish I could have met her, Eliza said. Me too. The vulnerability in his voice made her chest ache. She got up from her chair and crossed to where he was sitting, settling beside him on the floor. It was awkward. The space was cramped, and she had to tuck herself against his side, but it felt right. Kael wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. You okay down here? Yeah, this is good. They stayed like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers. Eliza felt safe in a way she'd never felt before. Not protected exactly, but accepted. Like she could be exactly who she was, flaws and all, and it would be enough. I'm glad you walked into my shop, she said quietly. Me too. Even though I was terrified of you? Especially because of that. It meant you were smart enough to be cautious. I'm still cautious. I know, but less than you were. He was right. She was less cautious now, less guarded. And while that still scared her sometimes, it also felt like progress. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and time spent with Kael. Eliza's business was growing. Word had spread about her skill with alterations, and she had more customers than she could handle. Some of them gave her looks when they came in, clearly aware of her relationship with Kael, but most just wanted their clothes fixed. Martha became a regular customer, stopping by every few weeks with new orders or just to talk. She was blunt to the point of rudeness sometimes, but Eliza found it refreshing after years of people who said one thing and meant another. "You're getting better at this," Martha said one afternoon, examining a finished dress. "At sewing? At taking up space. You don't apologize as much as you used to." Eliza blinked. "I apologize a lot?" "Used to. Every other sentence was sorry or excuse me or I didn't mean to bother you. Drove me crazy. But you've stopped doing it as much." "I hadn't noticed." "That's because you're actually changing instead of just pretending to change." Martha handed over payment for the dress. "That man's good for you." "Kael?" "No, the other giant Apache you're seeing. Of course, Kael." Eliza laughed despite herself. "Yeah, he is." "You love him yet?" The question was so direct it made Eliza stumble over her answer. That's personal." "So, I'm asking anyway." "I'm not sure yet." "What's there to be sure about? Either you do or you don't." "It's more complicated than that." "Only if you make it complicated." "You happy when you're with him?" "Yes." "You trust him?" "Yes." "Then what's the problem?" Eliza didn't have a good answer for that. The problem was her own fear, her own baggage, her own inability to let go of the past. But none of that had anything to do with Kael. "I'm working on it," she said finally. "Work faster. Life's too short to waste time being scared." After Martha left, Eliza sat at her work table and thought about what she'd said. About being happy, about trust, about wasting time. She was happy with Kael. Happier than she'd been in years. And she did trust him, more than she'd trusted anyone. So what was holding her back? That evening, when Kael stopped by, she made a decision. "I want to tell you something," she said. They were sitting outside her shop, watching the sunset. Kael had brought her wildflowers he'd picked on his way into town, and they sat in a jar on the bench between them. "All right," Kael said. "I've been thinking about what you said, about love, and I think I've been making it more complicated than it needs to be." "How so?" "I keep waiting to feel some big, overwhelming thing, like love is supposed to hit me like lightning or something. But that's not how it works, is it?" "Not always. Sometimes it's quiet, gradual. That's what this feels like. Like I've been falling in love with you so slowly I didn't even notice it happening." She turned to look at him. "I love you, Kael. I'm not sure when it started, but I know it's true now." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "You don't have to say it just because I did." "I'm not. I'm saying it because it's true. Because you make me feel like I matter. Because you've been patient with me even when I didn't deserve it. Because when I think about my future, you're in it." She took a shaky breath. "I love you, and I'm terrified, but I'm saying it anyway." Kael set the jar of flowers aside and pulled her into his arms. "I love you too." "I know." He laughed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "How do you feel?" "Scared. Happy, both at the same time." "That sounds about right." They sat like that as the sun finished setting, wrapped up in each other. And for the first time in her life, Eliza felt like she'd found something worth keeping. Saying the words changed something fundamental between them, not in a dramatic way. There were no fireworks, no sudden shift in the atmosphere. But Eliza felt lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged until she set it down. The next morning, Kael was waiting outside her shop when she arrived to open it. He had that look on his face, the one that meant he'd been thinking about something all night and had come to a decision. "We need to talk," he said. Eliza's stomach dropped. Those 4 words had never preceded anything good in her experience. "About what?" "About us. About what comes next." She unlocked the door with shaking hands and let them both inside. You're scaring me. I don't mean to. Just hear me out. Kyle followed her in and closed the door behind them. You said you loved me, and I believe you. But I also know you're still scared. Of me. Of this. Of what it means. I'm working on that. I know you are. But I think part of the problem is that we're stuck in this in-between place. You live here, I live out there, and we're always coming and going. It doesn't give you a chance to really settle into this. Eliza set her keys on the counter. What are you saying? I'm saying I want you to come live with me, at the cabin. The suggestion hit her like cold water. Move in with you? Yes. Kyle, I can't just leave my shop. My business is here. You could still run it. It's only an hour's ride. You could come into town a few days a week, take orders, do fittings. The rest you could work on from home. That's not practical. Why not? Because she struggled to find words that didn't sound like excuses. Because people already talk. If I move in with you, if I'm living out there with you unmarried, it'll get worse. So marry me. Eliza's brain stuttered to a halt. What? Marry me, Kale repeated, like he was suggesting they go for a walk. If the problem is people talking, then we make it official. We get married. You can't just propose like that, out of nowhere. It's not out of nowhere. I've been thinking about it for weeks. I just wasn't sure when to ask. So you decided to ask now, in the middle of a conversation about moving? Would you rather I got down on one knee and made a speech? Most people would. I'm not most people. And neither are you. Kale crossed his arms. Look, I know this isn't romantic. I know I'm doing this all wrong. But I love you, and I want to spend my life with you, and I don't see the point in waiting around when I already know what I want. Eliza sat down hard on the nearest chair. Her heart was racing, and she couldn't tell if it was from fear or excitement or some combination of both. You're serious. Completely. You want to marry me, a woman you've known for 4 months. I've known you long enough to know you're it for me. The rest is just details. Marriage isn't a detail, Kyle. It's huge. It's permanent. I know. That's the point. She stared at him, this enormous man who'd somehow become the center of her world, and tried to process what he was asking. Marriage. A life together. Waking up next to him every morning and falling asleep next to him every night. The idea terrified her. It also felt right in a way she couldn't explain. What if I say no? She asked quietly. Then I'll be disappointed, but I'll live with it. I'm not going to pressure you. But things would change between us. Maybe. I don't know. Kale scrubbed a hand over his face. I'm not trying to corner you. If you need more time, that's fine. But I wanted you to know where I stand. Eliza looked down at her hands. They were trembling. My first marriage was a disaster. I swore I'd never do it again. I'm not your first husband. I know that, but marriage scares me. The permanence of it. The way it can trap you if you're not careful. It can also free you if you're with the right person. How do you know you're the right person? I don't. Not with absolute certainty, but I know I'd spend every day trying to be. And I know you'd do the same. He moved closer, kneeling in front of her chair so they were eye level. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to build a life with me. The messy, complicated, imperfect kind of life where we fight sometimes and mess up sometimes and have to figure things out as we go. That doesn't sound appealing. It's not supposed to sound appealing. It's supposed to sound real. Eliza felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. I don't know if I'm brave enough for this. You're brave enough, you just don't believe it yet. What if I never believe it? Then I'll believe it for both of us until you catch up. She let out a shaky laugh. You make it sound so simple. Because it is simple. Not easy, but simple. Do you love me? Yes. Do you want to be with me? Yes. Then marry me. Everything else we can figure out together. Eliza closed her eyes. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was too fast, too risky, too much. But there was another part of her, smaller, quieter, but growing stronger, that whispered maybe this was exactly what she needed. A leap of faith, a choice to stop letting fear run her life. I need time to think about it, she said. How much time? I don't know, a few days? A week? Take as long as you need. I'm not going anywhere. He He kissed her forehead and stood. I should let you get to work. Cale, wait. He paused at the door. Thank you, Eliza said, for asking and for not being angry that I can't answer right now. I'm not angry, just hopeful. He smiled slightly. I'll see you later. After he left, Eliza sat in the quiet shop and tried to make sense of her feelings. Marriage. The word felt heavy, loaded with all the baggage from her first attempt. But this was different. Kyle was different. And maybe she was different too. She spent the day working mechanically, her hands busy with needle and thread while her mind spun in circles. By the time she closed the shop that evening, she still hadn't reached a decision. Martha stopped by just as Eliza was locking up. You look like hell, Martha said by way of greeting. Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear. What's wrong? Eliza hesitated. She didn't usually confide in people, but Martha had become something close to a friend over the past months, and right now she needed perspective. Kyle asked me to marry him. Martha's eyebrows shot up. And you said? I said I needed time to think about it. What's there to think about? Everything. I've been married before. It didn't end well. So? That was a different marriage to a different man. Or are you planning to judge this one based on the mistakes of the last? That's not fair. Life's not fair. Get used to it. Martha leaned against the doorframe. You love him? Yes. He treats you well? Better than anyone ever has. Then what's the problem? The problem is I'm terrified. What if it doesn't work? What if we get married and a year from now we realize we made a mistake? What if you don't get married and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? Martha crossed her arms. You can't live your life avoiding risk. That's not living. That's just existing. Easy for you to say. You're not the one making the decision. No, but I've made plenty of my own. And I can tell you from experience that the things I regret most aren't the risks I took. They're the ones I didn't take. Eliza looked at her. Did you ever get married? Once, long time ago. He died 10 years into it. Farm accident. Martha's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. I'd give anything to have more time with him. Even knowing how it ended, I wouldn't trade those 10 years for anything. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because you need to understand that there are no guarantees. Marriage doesn't promise you forever. It just promises you'll try. The words settled over Eliza like a blanket. What if I'm not ready? Then you wait. But don't wait because you're scared. Wait because you genuinely need more time. There's a difference. After Martha left, Eliza walked home slowly, turning the conversation over in her mind. She thought about Kyle and the cabin on the hill and the life he was offering her. She thought about her shop and her independence and the safety of keeping things as they were. But mostly she thought about the difference between being cautious and being a coward. That night, she barely slept. She kept seeing Kyle's face when he'd asked her to marry him. Open, vulnerable, hopeful. He'd put himself out there completely. And she'd asked for time. By morning, she knew what her answer would be. She closed the shop early and rode out to Kyle's cabin. He was outside chopping wood, his shirt already soaked with sweat despite the cool morning air. He looked up when he heard her approach, surprise flickering across his face. Eliza, what are you doing here? She dismounted and walked toward him, her heart pounding. I have an answer for you. Kale set down the axe slowly. All right. Ask me again. What? Ask me again to marry you. Do it properly this time. Something shifted in his expression. Hope mixed with disbelief. You want me to propose again? Yes. He wiped his hands on his pants and crossed to where she stood. Then, to her surprise, he actually did get down on one knee. Eliza Moore, he said, looking up at her with those dark, steady eyes. Will you marry me? Yes. The word came out steady, sure. Yes, I'll marry you. Kale stood and swept her into his arms, lifting her off the ground. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on, laughing and crying at the same time. You're sure? He asked when he finally set her down. I'm terrified, but I'm sure. That's good enough for me. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Eliza felt something inside her finally settle. This was right. Scary, yes. Uncertain, absolutely. But right. When? Kyle asked when they broke apart. When what? When do you want to get married? I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. Think now. Eliza laughed. You're really not romantic about this, are you? I proposed on one knee. That counts. Barely. She thought about it. Soon. I don't want a big thing, just something simple. How simple? Just us, and maybe Martha. She's the closest thing I have to family here. I can ask one of my friends to be there too. Make it official. All right, so just the four of us. When? Next week? Kyle grinned. Next week works. They spent the rest of the day making plans. Kale would handle finding someone to perform the ceremony. Apparently there was a traveling judge who came through the area once a month. Eliza would handle closing up her shop for a few days. What about after? Eliza asked. The moving in part. We'll take it slow. You don't have to move everything at once. Just bring what you need and we'll figure out the rest. What if I can't make it work? Running the shop from out here. Then we'll try something else. Open a shop closer to the cabin, or I'll move into town. We'll figure it out. You'd move into town for me. I do a lot of things for you. The simplicity of the statement made her chest ache. I'm really doing this. I'm really marrying you. Having second thoughts already? No. Just marveling at how my life turned out. 6 months ago, I was alone. Now I'm about to marry a man I barely knew existed. You want to wait longer? No, I'm ready, or as ready as I'll ever be. The week passed in a blur. Eliza told Martha, who reacted with a satisfied nod like she'd expected this outcome all along. She packed a trunk with clothes and essentials, sorted through her shop inventory, and tried not to panic about all the ways this could go wrong. On the morning of the wedding, she woke before dawn with butterflies rioting in her stomach. She put on the nicest dress she owned, a simple blue thing she'd made herself, and did her hair as best she could. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her face looked different, softer somehow, less haunted. Martha arrived to help her finish getting ready, fussing over details that Eliza hadn't even considered. You need flowers, Martha declared. I don't need flowers. Every bride needs flowers. Martha disappeared and came back 10 minutes later with a handful of wildflowers. There. Now you look proper. They rode out to Kael's cabin together. The judge was already there, a round man in his 60s who introduced himself as Judge Patterson. Kael stood next to him, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt and pants that were clearly new. You clean up nice, Eliza said when she dismounted. So do you. His friend, a quiet man named Thomas, who lived even further out in the hills, stood off to the side. He nodded at Eliza, but didn't say much. We ready? Judge Patterson asked. Eliza looked at Kael. He looked back at her with an expression that was equal parts nervous and determined. Ready? Eliza said. The ceremony was short and simple. The judge read from a book, asked them the necessary questions, and had them repeat vows that were standard and impersonal. Eliza barely heard the words. She was too focused on Kael's hands holding hers, warm and steady. Do you, Eliza Moore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. And do you, Kael, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Kael cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently. It wasn't showy or dramatic. It was just them, making a promise to each other in front of witnesses. When they pulled apart, Martha was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Congratulations, Judge Patterson said. May you have many happy years together. They signed the necessary papers, and just like that, Eliza was married again. The second time around felt nothing like the first. There was no sense of dread, no feeling of being trapped, just a quiet certainty that she'd made the right choice. After the judge and Thomas left, Martha pulled Eliza aside. You did good, Martha said. I hope so. You did. That man loves you. Anyone with eyes can see it. I love him too. I know. That's why this is going to work. Martha squeezed her hand. Be happy, girl. You've earned it. After Martha rode off, Eliza and Kael were finally alone. They stood outside the cabin, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. How do you feel? Kael asked. Strange. Good. Terrified. That's about what I expected. Are you terrified? A little. Mostly, I'm just relieved you didn't change your mind. I thought about it. I know. But I didn't. I know that too. He took her hand. Come on. I want to show you something. He led her inside the cabin. It looked different than the last time she'd been there. He'd added things, a second chair at the table, a small dresser in the corner, hooks on the wall for her clothes. He'd made space for her without being asked. You did all this? Eliza asked. I wanted you to feel like this was your home too, not just mine. The thoughtfulness of it made her eyes sting. Thank you. You're welcome. He pulled her close. I mean it, Eliza. This is our home now, not mine. Ours. She rested her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to get scared and push you away and say the wrong things. I know. And you're still okay with that? I'm still okay with that, as long as you promise to keep trying. I promise. They spent their first day as husband and wife doing ordinary things. Eliza unpacked her trunk while Kael made lunch. They ate outside, sitting on the ground because the bench was too small for both of them. In the afternoon, they walked up to the spot where Kael had first told her he loved her, and sat watching the view. What are you thinking? Kael asked. That I never thought I'd be here. Married again. Happy. Eliza leaned against him. I thought I was broken. Too damaged to have this. You're not broken. You're just healing. Same thing. It's really not. Broken means you can't be fixed. Healing means you're already fixing yourself. Eliza thought about that, about the difference between being broken and being in the process of becoming whole. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I just pay attention. To what? To you, to what you need, to what helps and what doesn't. She turned to look at him. I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. You deserve everything good that comes your way. I'm trying to believe that. I know, and I can see it working. You're different than you were when we met. How? You look people in the eye now. You don't apologize for existing. You take up space without shrinking yourself. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're becoming who you were always supposed to be, and I get to watch it happen. What if I backslide? What if I have bad days where I'm scared and small again? Then you have bad days, everyone does, but those days don't erase the progress you've made. Eliza kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact. When they broke apart, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We should head back, Kael said. It'll be dark soon. Not yet. Let's stay a little longer. So they stayed, wrapped up in each other, watching the day end and the stars begin to appear. And for the first time in her life, Eliza felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The next few months weren't easy. Adjusting to married life, to living together, to sharing space with another person, it all took work. Eliza had her bad days, times when the fear crept back in and made her doubt everything. Kael had his too, moments when his patience wore thin, or when the weight of being responsible for another person felt too heavy. But they worked through it. They fought sometimes, sharp, honest arguments where they said things they regretted, and then they apologized and figured out how to do better. They learned each other's rhythms, their triggers, their needs. Eliza kept running her shop, riding into town twice a week to take orders and do fittings. The rest of the time she worked from the cabin, sewing by lamplight while Kael carved or read. It was quieter than she'd expected, lonelier sometimes, but it was also peaceful in a way her life had never been before. Do you miss it? Kael asked one evening. Town, being around people. Sometimes, but not enough to go back. Eliza finished a seam and set down her needle. Why? Are you worried I'm unhappy? A little. I'm not unhappy. I'm adjusting. There's a difference. You're sure? I'm sure. Stop worrying. But she understood why he worried. She'd given him plenty of reasons to doubt her over the months they'd been together. The trick now was showing him, showing herself, that she was committed to making this work. One afternoon, about 6 months into their marriage, Eliza was in town picking up supplies when she ran into the older man who'd confronted her in her shop all those months ago. He was with the same group of ranch hands, and they stopped short when they saw her. Mrs. Moore, the man said, his tone dripping with false politeness. Or is it something else now? It's Mrs. Moore, Eliza said evenly. She'd kept her name after marrying Kyle. It felt important somehow, maintaining that piece of her identity. Heard you married that Apache. That true? It is. Shame. Pretty white woman like you, wasting herself on— Careful, Eliza interrupted. Her voice was quiet but firm. You're about to say something you'll regret. The man's eyes narrowed. That a threat? It's a fact. You can insult me all you want. I don't care what you think. But if you insult my husband, we're going to have a problem. You think you scare me? Little thing like you? No. But I think your wife would be interested to know you spend your afternoons harassing women in town instead of doing your job. And I think your boss would be interested to know you're running off his customers. Eliza shifted the package in her arms. Or we can skip all that, and you can just leave me alone. Your choice. The man stared at her for a long moment. Then he spat on the ground and walked away, his friends trailing after him. Eliza's hands were shaking by the time she got back to her horse, but she also felt something like pride. She'd stood up for herself. She'd stood up for Kyle, and she hadn't apologized or backed down. When she got home and told Kyle what had happened, he looked at her with something close to awe. You threatened to tell his wife? And his boss. Would you have done it? Absolutely. Kyle laughed and pulled her into his arms. You're terrifying. I'm really not. You are. In the best way. He kissed the top of her head. I'm proud of you. For what? For standing up for yourself. For us. For not letting fear win. I was scared the whole time. I know, but you did it anyway. That's what makes it brave. That night, lying in bed next to Kyle, Eliza thought about the person she'd been when they met. Small, quiet, afraid. And then she thought about who she was now. Still small, still quiet sometimes, but no longer afraid, or at least not controlled by her fear. Kyle, she said into the darkness. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For seeing me when I was invisible. For waiting while I figured things out. For loving me even when I didn't know how to love you back. He rolled over to face her. You don't have to thank me for that. I want to. Because you changed my life, and I don't think I ever properly told you how much that means. You show me every day. That's enough. She kissed him, slow and sweet, and felt the truth of his words settle over her. She did show him. In the way she'd built a life with him, in the way she trusted him with her fears, in the way she kept choosing him every single day. A year after their wedding, Eliza and Kyle rode into town together. It was a sunny Saturday, and the streets were crowded with people running errands and catching up with neighbors. As they walked through town, Eliza noticed the stares, but they were different now. Less hostile, more curious. A few people even nodded in greeting. They're getting used to us, Eliza observed. Took them long enough. Better late than never. They stopped at the general store to pick up flour and sugar, and the owner, a man who'd been coldly polite to Eliza in the past, actually smiled when they walked in. Afternoon, Mrs. Moore, Kyle. Afternoon, Eliza replied. As they shopped, Eliza thought about how far she'd come. A year ago, she would have been anxious about being seen with Kyle in public. Now she walked beside him without hesitation, her hand tucked into his. On their way out of town, they passed the dress shop. Eliza had sold it a few months ago to a young woman who'd moved in from back east. It had been bittersweet, letting go of the business she'd built, but it had also felt right. She was ready for something new. Any regrets? Kyle asked as they rode past. About selling the shop? About any of it. Eliza thought about it honestly. No, not about the big things. I regret wasting so much time being scared. But I don't regret choosing you. I don't regret building this life. Good. Because I don't either. They rode home together, and as the cabin came into view, Eliza felt a sense of peace she'd never experienced before. This was home, not because of the building or the land, but because of the person she shared it with. That evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Kyle said, I've been thinking. About what? About kids. Whether we want them. Eliza's breath caught. They'd never talked about this. Do you want them? I think so, eventually, but only if you do. She thought about it. The idea of a child, of creating a life with Kael, was both terrifying and appealing. I'm not sure. I never thought I'd be a good mother. Why not? Because my mother wasn't, and I'm afraid I'd repeat her mistakes. You wouldn't. You're nothing like her. How do you know? Because I've watched you. I've seen how gentle you are, how patient. You'd be an amazing mother. I don't know if I believe that. You don't have to decide now. We've got time. He squeezed her hand. I just wanted you to know it's something I'd like. Someday. Okay, I'll think about it. And she did think about it over the following weeks and months. She thought about what it would mean to bring a child into the world, to be responsible for another person, to try to give them everything she never had. 6 months later, Eliza realized she was pregnant. The discovery came with a complicated mix of emotions: joy, terror, disbelief. She told Kael that evening, her hands shaking as she said the words. I'm pregnant. Kael went very still. You're sure? As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. How do you feel about it? Scared, happy, both? That seems to be our pattern. She laughed despite her nerves. What if I'm terrible at this? You won't be. You don't know that. I do, because I know you. And I know you'll love this child the way you should have been loved. That's all any kid really needs. Eliza rested her head against his chest and tried to believe him. It was hard. The fear was still there, whispering all the ways she could fail. But underneath the fear was something stronger. Hope. The belief that maybe she could do this. That maybe she and Kael could build something good together. 9 months later, Eliza gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when she thought she couldn't do it. But Kael stayed with her the whole time, his hand in hers, his voice steady and calm. When the baby finally arrived, tiny and screaming and perfect, Eliza held her and felt something inside her shift. This was her daughter, hers and Kael's, a person they'd created together. She's beautiful, Kael said, his voice thick with emotion. She is. Eliza looked down at the baby's face. What should we name her? I was thinking Sarah, after my mother. Sarah. Eliza tested the name. I like it. They named her Sarah, and she became the center of their world. Eliza learned how to be a mother the way she'd learned everything else, by trying, failing, and trying again. There were hard days when she felt overwhelmed and inadequate, but there were also moments of pure joy that made everything worth it. Watching Kael with their daughter was one of Eliza's greatest pleasures. He was so gentle with her, this enormous man cradling a tiny baby like she was made of glass. He sang to her in Apache, taught her the names of plants and animals, carried her on his shoulders so she could see the world from up high. You're a natural at this, Eliza told him one evening. So are you. I don't feel like it. That's because you're too hard on yourself. Sarah's happy, healthy, loved. That's what matters. Eliza looked at their daughter, sleeping peacefully in her cradle, and felt a fierce protective love that surprised her with its intensity. I never thought I could have this. A family, a real one. But you do have it. We have it. I know. Sometimes I still can't believe it's real. Believe it. This is your life now. Our life. Years passed. Sarah grew from a baby into a toddler, then a child. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. She was fearless in a way that both terrified and delighted Eliza. The town slowly changed its attitude toward their family. Some people never came around, but others did. Sarah made friends, played with the other children, and navigated a world that saw her as different, but didn't let that stop her. She's stronger than I was, Eliza said to Kael one afternoon, watching Sarah play with a group of kids in town. She's strong because of you, because you taught her she doesn't have to make herself small. I'm still learning that lesson myself. I know, but you're getting there. And she was. Slowly, gradually, Eliza was learning to take up space, to speak up when something bothered her, to stand firm in her convictions. It wasn't easy, and she still had bad days, but the good days outnumbered the bad now. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Kael took Eliza back to the spot where he'd first told her he loved her. They left Sarah with Martha, who'd become something like a grandmother to the girl. "Why are we here?" Eliza asked as they climbed the trail. "Because I wanted to remind you of something." "Of what?" They reached the top and the view spread out before them, miles of wilderness under a clear blue sky. "Of this," Kael said, "of how far we've come, of what we've built together." Eliza looked out at the landscape, then back at her husband. He was graying at the temples now, his face marked with the lines that came from years of smiling. He'd never looked more handsome to her. "I love you," she said. "I know I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. I love you too, and I'm proud of you, of who you've become. I couldn't have become her without you." "That's not true. You were always her. You just needed someone to see it." Eliza thought about the woman she'd been when Kael first walked into her shop, small, scared, convinced she was meant to disappear. And then she thought about who she was now. Still small in stature, but no longer in presence. Still capable of fear, but no longer ruled by it. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me, for waiting for me, for loving me even when I didn't know how to love myself." "You don't have to thank me for that. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done." They stood together, watching the sun begin its descent, and Eliza felt the truth of her life settle over her. She was happy, not in some perfect, uncomplicated way, but in the messy, real way that came from building something worth keeping. She'd spent so much of her life trying to be invisible, trying to take up as little space as possible, trying to be the kind of person who didn't inconvenience anyone. But standing next to Kael, with their daughter waiting for them at home and a whole life spread out before them, Eliza finally understood something fundamental. Being small didn't mean being insignificant, and taking up space didn't mean being selfish. It meant being alive, being present, being seen, and that was worth more than all the safety in the world.